Hi everyone, welcome again to VLGA Connect and the Weekly Governance Update. It's brought to you by Hunt and Hunt Lawyers. And joining me as always, Steve Cooper, Chief of Staff of the VLGA. Good day, Steve.
Hi.
How you going?
I'm well on this slightly damp Friday.
Indeed. And what's your week been like? I imagine you've been trying to carve out as much time as possible to watch some online proceedings.
My week's been very varied because we've got to get to last night at Whittlesea, which was a highlight of the week, but we'll come to that later. Yeah, I might have spent a bit of time just listening to the Operation Watts public hearing as former local government minister Adam Somyurek had the dubious pleasure of a conversation with Chris Carr, SC.
Yes, what happened to Mr. Carr? Was it a bicycle accident or something?
He said, in fact, it was a week ago, that he's not as good a cyclist as he thought he was because there's a bit of facial damage there.
Look, we might come back to Operation Watts. I've been spending a bit of time watching different things. Being the local government tragic that I am, I'm trying to watch as many of the special meetings of councils to elect their mayors. And that's made for some interesting viewing, can I tell you, Steve?
Oh, well, Chris, we know that there is like a sliding scale from a quite predetermined outcome, and a number of councils have actually basically said that by having mayors elect in advance of the meeting, so everyone knows what's going to happen, versus a surprise at the last minute, I suppose, Chris.
So Bendigo did that with the mayor and deputy mayor-elect. Central Goldfields has done that with the mayor-elect Chris Meadows-Taylor, due to be confirmed next week, as I understand it. But yes, some interesting trends from this sense. I've found it really interesting. It shows you some of the differences in how the governance rules have been set up for different councils, in terms of nominations, the way they're received, how, if the councillors speak to their nominations and the order in which that happens. Some of them are choosing not to have deputy mayors, Steve, which is not unusual. I think 10 last year. So far, I'm aware of 3 this year. Northern Grampians, Pyrenees, 2 that come to mind. And we've had a couple of examples where the requirement of the Act for a mayor to be elected with an absolute majority has brought about some interesting byplay in the chamber. Have you seen any of those?
I have seen a bit of that, including, I think, Moyne Shire, where the councils had to come back and have another go at the mayoral election because with an even number of councillors for 2 candidates, no one had an absolute majority.
Yeah, it was interesting to watch, and they've yet to schedule that meeting, as far as I'm aware, to have another go. They had 2 goes at it at the time. They took a pause, took some advice, etc., and the deadlock wasn't broken. And really that arose because one of the councillors who was on video link, their link failed, and they were no longer participating in the meeting, which caused that interesting issue with the numbers.
And Chris, I make no comment about that, except because we don't know, the link may well have failed, but it's an interesting dynamic for councils in terms of whether that happens accidentally or on purpose in any case. And as I said, I've got no idea about the particular one that we're talking about. Another really interesting thing, though, and you touched on this, was that comment around the governance rules and how, in the interests of, not overdoing the governance rules, at times the decisions and the way that things run at the meeting for the election of the mayor needs to be sort of by agreement of the council as to what they're happy with. And it's probably a good advertisement for, thinking through the detail early, because as we know, it gets more difficult when people have an interest in or an understanding of the way that a particular outcome might occur if you leave that decision too late.
And I think some elements of custom and practice at those particular councils that have built up over the years that are still being held onto. Most councils, the CEO seems to be chairing at least the start of the meeting and acting as the returning officer until a mayor's elected. I've noticed 1 or 2 where the outgoing mayor is still hanging on to that chairing of the meeting, rightly or wrongly. I'm assuming the governance rules allows for it. Couple of notable appointments, Steve. There's quite a few of them, but I just want to particularly note Councillor Anthony Tran, the new mayor of the city of Maribyrnong, the youngest ever mayor of Maribyrnong at 22. And it was a lovely ceremony. He spoke in his acceptance speech half in English and half in Vietnamese, which I thought was a really nice touch for that community.
That is fantastic. No, congratulations to Maribyrnong and Councillor Tran. That's terrific. What else, Chris?
Oh, there's 2 mayors this week that have been elected for their 5th term. And I think in both cases, it's historic. I think it's the first time at Dandenong, Jim Mehmeti, and at Moira Shire, Libro Mustica have been elected as mayor, and it's the 5th time for each of those. So congratulations to them. That's no mean feat.
Absolutely. And as we touched on last week, Chris, a lot of returning mayors this time round.
Absolutely, and still quite a few to come, Steve, and a plug for the Local Government News Roundup website, which has got the list that I'm doing my best to keep updated in as real time as possible as those results come in.
That has been the go-to website of the week, Chris. Congratulations.
Getting lots of hits, so a lot of people
I'm sure it is.
Found it, which is, it's probably all you. You're probably checking and refreshing every 10 minutes.
Oh, multiple times daily, Chris, which is just ridiculous. But anyway.
Now, we've got the results in from the South Gippsland Shire Council this week. It's come in a few days early. The VEC had said from the 12th of November the results should be available, which was today, but they surprised us with a declaration on Wednesday.
Under promise and over deliver is usually a good thing, Chris. So good on the VEC. And interesting results in South Gippsland.
Yeah, so the councillors that had, or the former councillors from the last term that had put their hand up again were unsuccessful. There's only one person on the council now with previous council experience, which goes back to the 2012 term, and that's Moya Davies. And there's a real nice story here that links back to the VLGA, Steve, in this result.
Oh, absolutely, Chris. The VLGA were thrilled to receive a modest amount of government funding to expand our local women leading change program and to run some workshops prior to the election. And we were also provided with the opportunity by the Shire to run a candidate workshop. And I can say that the 4 women who were elected to South Gippsland Shire were all participants, 3 of those in the local women leading change program. 4 out of 5 is around 44%. That's about the state average. We're really thrilled with that outcome.
Excellent outcome, and well done to the VLGA for its role in that program. Just want to point out that last week we had Lucy Dalton on the program. We were speculating about when the municipal monitor might be announced for South Gippsland. It happened actually about 2 or 3 hours after our program went online, and it's Prue Digby who's been appointed to the role. Prue, of course, long-standing executive in state and local government, and also has monitor experience, having done the role at Frankston quite recently.
She does indeed, and we've talked previously, and I think we will again, Chris, about the appointment of monitors, in circumstances where in the past that may not have happened.
So South Gippsland Shire coming out of administration, it'll be a 3-year term for those councillors, so they'll align with the rest of the councils in October 2024 for the next election. They're not the only council that's been under administration, of course. Casey and Whittlesea, and full disclosure, I'm currently an administrator at the city of Whittlesea, and I know there's been a lot of work being put into and a lot of thought into a similar leadership development program as we've seen bear fruit, shall I say, at South Gippsland, Steve.
Oh, that's true, Chris, and both Casey and Whittlesea are moving down that path, and there'll probably be more to talk about in detail further on. But Whittlesea, and yes, you can just be quiet for a moment, Chris. Whittlesea last night, we were thrilled to be involved in a program called, and I should have had this ready to go, Chris, and I just haven't, called Leading Change for the Greater Good, a panel that was conducted last night. And I can honestly say, Chris, it was brilliant. Chaired by Mehek Sheikh, with panellists Nayana Bandri and 3 excellent councillors: Jenna Davey-Burns, the newly elected Deputy Mayor at Kingston, Joseph Howell, who is the immediate past mayor at Hume, and Councillor Greg James, councillor at Greater Shepparton and Yorta Yorta Man. And look, all of the panellists were just stunning. And the thing for me was it was a reminder of what local leadership looks like, not only in terms of council leadership, but within communities. The panellists talked about the importance for, aspiring councillors of like just being involved. You don't necessarily start by being a councillor. Overcoming difficulties, but also all of the councillors talked about a grand vision, about why they're doing that, and the notion of servant leadership, if you like, Chris. And it was a stunningly good event, and the VLGA was thrilled to be involved. And I suppose I should say congratulations to my colleague Deborah Wu for her role in that, and for Craig Lloyd and the team at Whittlesea Council for entrusting that with us.
Fabulous. Really, really pleased to hear that. I must tell you, Steve, we often talk about conflicts of interest because I'm an administrator at Whittlesea, and I've got a great interest, obviously, in this program being successful, but I have absented myself from discussions and decisions because of the likelihood of the involvement of the VLGA. The obvious reason, because of this program and similar ones that I do for the VLGA. But I'm pleased to hear that that went so well.
Let's just say too, Chris, it's a really good example where, in fact, you're not an employee of the VLGA, you are a contractor to the VLGA, but a reasonable person might be drawn to the conclusion that your decisions might be influenced by that involvement, ergo, perceived conflict of interest. Well done.
Yes, I did say it was out of an abundance of caution, but we talk about these perceptions and how they can get blown out of proportion, etc. We certainly want to practice what we preach, don't we?
Absolutely.
Now, the other big bit of council news this week is the resignation, from Victoria at least, is the resignation of the councillor at Yarra Ranges Shire, Councillor Catherine Burnett-Wake. Who was tapped on the shoulder to take not tapped on the shoulder, there was a vote against another sitting councillor at another council, by the way, for the vacancy in the seat of Eastern Victoria, which arose when Edward Donoghue resigned a couple of months ago, Steve. So that's going to trigger, obviously, a process to fill that councillor role at Yarra Ranges.
Yeah, Chris, I am presuming that there will be a recount, and I am also presuming that the VSC will be going through that process at the moment of checking, A, the continued eligibility, and B, the willingness of the unsuccessful candidates to stand or to participate in that recount.
That's my assumption as well. And if history serves, we'll publish this episode online, and the VSC will make an announcement about an hour later. That's what's been happening lately. But at the moment, we don't know. Yeah,
if someone wants a quick decision from government, let us know. We'll run it and see what happens in the meantime.
So there was always going to be a vacancy by the sounds of it, because the Age reported that the final vote for that seat was between Ms Burnett-Wake and Steve Holland from Mornington Peninsula Shire. So one of those councils was going to be having a vacancy regardless, by the sounds of it.
And by way of disclosure, VLGA board member, Councillor Steve Holland of Mornington Shire.
Yes, yeah, yes. Reasonably new board member, isn't he?
He is.
Now, there's some other dispatches with councillors' names being mentioned in terms of pre-selection contests. So I suspect this might not be the last time we're talking about this sort of situation arising.
No, no. I think there might be rich pickings for content over the next sort of 12 months or so, Chris.
Let's go back to Operation Watts. Any particular observations with a relevance to local government that you think is worth sharing, Steve?
Look, a general one, Chris, that we haven't talked about, and that is that I think at those inquiries, there is a process where those being interviewed sort of come to understand the rules of the game, if you like, the informal rules of the game, as the cross-examination continues. And it's been really interesting to see, I suppose, the change in tone over the last few days. And that's not uncommon even with people who are maybe cross-examined only over half a day or a day. The other one for me is, I guess, the tension between culture versus the high-order interest of IBAC. So on the one hand, from the former minister, there is a quite legitimate point that appointments to ministerial offices are grace and favour appointments, if you like. It has not been uncommon historically in England, in Australia, in other countries for example, family members to be appointed to those offices. There's also been posited to the IBAC a suggestion, I suppose, that being re-elected is part of the political process and it's not unreasonable, is the position that has been put, to apply public resources to the process of being re-elected, because that is ultimately what's powerful. What gets you power, gets things done.
Yeah.
Compare and contrast the IBAC view, and it's a pretty compelling one, Chris, that actually the public interest is paramount. Is it reasonable that the public purse be put to those uses? And maybe what we've seen, I think the phrase might have been used in the original 60 Minutes episode, that what might have been an element of the culture, if it becomes industrial scale, gets attention.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to hear some of those conversations played back when that 60 Minutes program was imminent, if I can use our residency word.
Which we do.
Yes, some interesting insights from there. All right, I know it's not finished.
Actually, can I just make one point on that, Chris? That the lingering lesson for that too, though, is that there are often things that will happen on a day-to-day basis that are rationalised or passed off as, on a question of materiality. But where that immaterial kind of, misconduct becomes habitual or part of the culture, then it becomes extremely problematic. And that's why dealing with the small stuff's important.
All right, we'll leave that there. I'm sure we'll have more to talk about next week because it's not over. Quite a few items in the news I thought we might just touch on briefly, Steve, see if you have a comment or not. It's fine if you don't. New South Wales, I was a bit surprised to see that the rules for council meetings hadn't yet allowed for the participation virtually by councillors. They've updated their model code now, which will allow councillors to attend meetings virtually for reasons such as illness, disability, caring and work responsibilities, or other reasons agreed to by the council. Surprised?
No, not really. I mean, there'll always be that bit of a tension around what is mandated and what is the determination of the council. The principles-based approach, I suppose, would leave the discretion with individual councils, and that's why it's local government. I mean, and we've heard and talked about the fact that there will always be different views.
The surprise for me is that we're, nearly 2 years into a pandemic and the code's just been adjusted now, basically. That's where my surprise came from. The nominations for the New South Wales Council elections closed last week. There were 3,864 nominations for the 1,200 positions. And interesting to note, a few uncontested elections around the state, mostly in rural areas. Steve, there's at least one mayor, a couple, I think, that have been returned because they stood unopposed, and a few wards or councils where the number of candidates was equal to or slightly less than the vacancies that were there.
We see a culture in some of the rural councils here in Victoria too, Chris, where people sort of feel a bit bashful, if you like, about standing against a sitting councillor who's not seen to be doing a bad job. It would seem to be a bit insulting. The contrary view, of course, is that democracy is a great thing. And if someone puts themselves up for public office, they should be prepared to be challenged.
That's the silver lining, yes. It's review season, it feels like. We've got the cultural review of the sector happening in Victoria at the moment with people waiting to see what that discussion paper might hold. In Tasmania, the minister there announced a few weeks back that there'd be a pretty wide-ranging review of the local government sector. And in just this past week, I understand he's met with mayors and general managers to outline that program and that process, what it will look like. It's 3 stages over 18 months, and it does sound like it's going to be a pretty all-encompassing review of the sector and its responsibilities.
Chris, if I can turn the tables, you've been involved in a lot of reviews over your career. What's the sort of approach that you would bring and the advice to a council when a review's announced?
Good question. Without notice, Steve. The first thing I'd say is put the skepticism aside, because it seems to me that any time these sorts of reviews come up, there's a natural tendency to think, okay, yeah, why is this happening? Nothing will change. Why should we bother? I think you've got to put that to one side and think about, what are all the things that you've raised in the past or you've been concerned about? What could be working better? And use it as an opportunity to put those things on the table, because if you don't participate, you can't then you can't then take pot shots at what the outcome is, can you?
Absolutely, I agree, Chris. It's sort of two-part. One is it's a really good opportunity to articulate what you stand for on the relevant topic, and I think for me the other part is a time for reflection. It's an opportunity to reflect internally on how we're going and could we do things differently. Is this particular regime working for us? I think the other one is to also reflect on what's going on in government that has led to that particular review. How do we get an alignment of objectives so that when we do submit, we build our own brand because we've made a thoughtful submission.
Absolutely would agree with all of that. I don't know enough about the Tasmanian system to understand what sort of issues might be bubbling away under the surface that has led to this. But what I can say is we'll be watching with interest to see what transpires.
Bated breath, Chris.
While we're on reviews, Planning and Environment Act, which, as you pointed out to me the other day, is older than the Local Government Act that was recently changed. Where is that in terms of a review process at the moment?
So there's a state government committee of inquiry, Chris, a parliamentary inquiry into the Planning and Environment Act 1987. So in terms of reference have been published, a couple of references to local government, but there's certainly an opportunity for councils to submit to that, and I'd be encouraging councils to think through their particular frustrations or comments around that. Now, at the VLGA, we've been really interested. We're not town planners, just from a governance point of view as to what a submission might look like, and had the opportunity to meet with Tony Rownick and Andrew Gunter at Hunt and Hunt during the week to just talk through, again, more the governance elements of the Act as opposed to the planning detail.
Excellent, Steve. And in your spare time, I understand you've been spotted perusing the Finance and Public Administration References Committee papers this is out of Canberra, isn't it? Where do you find the time for this?
Oh, someone tweeted yesterday morning, and I happened to be out on a walk and thought, I'll have a listen to this. And it's a committee of inquiry into administration and expenditure of funding under the Urban Congestion Fund, which is AKA car parks. It was governance geeks paradise, I've got to say, Chris, because the session that I was listening to, Dr. Catherine Williams and the Honourable Anthony Whealy, former New South Wales judge, who is an eminent commentator on public integrity. They are both from the Centre of Public Integrity, as well as Professor Richard Mulgan from the Crawford School of Public Policy, were talking through the machinations of government and how government ought deal with grants processes, I suppose, Chris, and it was absolutely fascinating.
Oh, well, there you go.
I'll keep going.
Yeah, please.
They talked about the role, the power, and the independence of the public service, and how there is a public good arising from frank and fearless advice from a public service, as opposed to these decisions being generated at the political level, if you like. We'll come back to that point. They talked about having an authorising environment. So, the notion that candidates might make a promise, and for councillors, think through the things that you might have promised your community as a candidate, and that thing that you have to then go through, that just because you've been elected doesn't mean they've been passed. You actually, within your authorising environment, need to get a council decision accordingly. Yeah. And so I guess the real takeaway for me, Chris, was the links, because councillors at the moment are doing that first piece of really strong strategic work after the adoption of the council plan and the community vision around assessing capital works projects. A lot of councils will have started, some will be coming up, and the importance of taking it and considering, overlaying the councillor role in considering the advice from the officers around the capital works program.
And important at this stage too, given that there's the new requirement for a long-term asset management plan that needs to be in place by, I think, the middle of next year, from memory. That's going to tie into any of those future capital works decisions that they make as well.
Oh, absolutely, Chris. And so for me, there's a number of things. It's where will it fit? Where will your capital works project fit in relation to the asset plan that you haven't quite developed yet? The importance, and again, particularly for new councillors, of making sure that the strength of alignment with your council plan feeds into the prioritising of your asset works. And I suppose the other one for me is really a shot across the bow. We've got federal and state elections within the next 12 months. And one thing we know is that other levels of government can be inclined to offer wads of money, but never the full cost of projects that appear nowhere in the council plan. So there's a real external advocacy opportunity for councils to market their capital works plan and really very publicly suggest to other levels of government that the projects to be funded are the ones that, through our consultation, we see as being important. Because we know, Chris, what happens when government money is given to a council project.
We know what can happen, yes.
Well, what happens is
in some cases, Steve, in some cases, nothing happens.
Well, actually, there's been a bit of that this week, Chris.
But sorry, I digress. Go where you were going with that.
Oh, well, where I was going was councils end up needing to find the money to build the thing, and it's not only building the asset, there is an ongoing cost of running the thing. So, and if it's a project that's nowhere in the council plan, why are we doing it?
Very, very true. Steve, we're going to have to wrap it up. I do want to give a couple of plugs. I know you've had a listen, as have I, to the latest edition of the LG Procast, which is the excellent new podcast from LG Pro Victoria. This one's got some really good insights in it about the Great Resignation and how it might impact on local government in particular.
And a terrific reminder, Chris, about the importance of being an employer of choice, of finding ways to be flexible, to attract and retain good people. And those organisations that can actually do that will go well in the next few years.
Check that one out after you've caught up with all your VLGA Connect and Local Government News Roundup podcasts, of course, but it is on Apple Podcasts and Spotify now, I know. And from the Everyone Has a Podcast These Days file, Steve, do you remember Jackie Weaver? Not the actress.
No, Jackie Weaver this is without notice, Chris, was it the Handforth Parish Council in England?
Oh, you are good. You are very, very good. Jackie Weaver was the stand-in chair for a meeting of the Handforth Parish Council in England. I think it's in Cheshire, actually. I might have made that bit up. Last year. It's been viewed 6 million times on YouTube, that particular meeting that got out of hand. So 2 notes, Steve. Jackie, now you remember she was accused by the outgoing or the former chair of having no authority at that meeting?
That's true, she was.
She now has a podcast called Jackie Weaver Has the Authority. She's proposing to answer all of life's big unanswered questions. But the reason I became aware of this is the Handforth Parish Council, in a move to distance itself from the toxicity of that particular event, has changed its name.
What are they calling themselves now, Chris?
Are you sitting down? Because you'll wonder how they got here. They're now the Handforth Town Council.
Excellent.
And on that note, Steve, I think that just leaves us to thank Hunt and Hunt Lawyers for being the sponsor of the Governance Update. We really appreciate their support, and to thank you for listening and watching. And Steve, have a great week. Talk to you soon.
You too, Chris. Thanks.
Steve Cooper with us, and that's the Governance Update from VLGA Connect. Bye for now.